Pre and post workout nutrition for CrossFit is something that we all worry about, and you can make some real effect on your performance depending on what you do. However, it doesn't need to be as complicated as you may think, and there may actually be a couple of things that you worry about which you don't really need to. So covering the pre-workout window first, it depends on when you're training and how much time you have before you train. Depending on your last meal before a training session, you might not even need to have anything for training that time. If you've had carbohydrates well before, or let's say you're training in the morning and you had dinner the night before, which involves some carbohydrates, you've probably got enough carbohydrates still in the tank for you to train without needing to take pre-workout carbohydrates. This could also be seen as a train low strategy, which can really help your body learn to use fat for exercise, where it'll only really use fat for exercise when it's in much lower intensities or recovering from it. But most of the time, the body will use a combination of carbohydrates and fats. It depends on the intensity of the exercise. However, if you want to feel good for your session, or you haven't had carbohydrates before a session, then having carbohydrates before the session can give you that energy for it. Okay, carbohydrates are the better fuel source for high intense exercise like CrossFit. Okay, and so although that your body will burn a combination of carbohydrates and fats, it will turn to glycogen and glucose first for energy. So having some pre-workout carbohydrates can be really beneficial for your performance. If you're going to train fasted or in the morning, then having pre-workout carbohydrates as well can minimize the effect of muscle protein breakdown, which is really useful because the last thing you want to be doing when training is using muscle for fuel. You'd rather use carbohydrates and then allow your muscles to recover afterwards. In terms of how long before your training session to eat food, 1 to 3 hours is a good amount of time to allow for digestion and utilization, and the closer toward a workout window is where you want to be using more faster acting food sources. So when carbohydrates are concerned, you're looking at higher GI carbs like dried fruit to an extent, and things like sweets or carb powders. And then further away from the workout window is where you can eat more starchy carbohydrates, things that take a little bit longer to break down, digest and utilize. In terms of protein pre-workout, again, this can help minimize muscle protein breakdown. So something as easy as 0.3 grams per kilo of body weight protein in a whey shake can be really beneficial for a pre-workout protein source, especially if it's quite close. If it's further away, again, 1 to 3 hours, then you can eat a more solid type of protein source, something like a dairy or a meat or a fish. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, then you're going to have to look at a mixed protein source, so a couple of different plant-based sources in order to get a full scope amino acid chain, or even a soya protein drink. In terms of any sort of dietary fat pre-workout, it's completely up to you. Fat slows down digestion, so again, the further away from a workout, you can have some fat within your meal, that's absolutely fine. And then closer to the workout, you're looking to just have some lower fats. Okay, so that pretty much covers pre-workout nutrition. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. To sum up, some protein, some carbohydrates, some fats maybe. And again, as I've just talked about there, the protein and carbohydrates are both dependent on when you train and if you really need or want them. Don't go for a branched chain amino acid supplement, because if you're taking in enough dietary protein over the course of the day, you're getting enough amino acids anyway, and the branched chain amino acids are just going to be a waste of money really, because muscle protein synthesis over the whole course of the day will still be positive if you get enough dietary protein in during the day. So moving on to post-workout nutrition, let's talk about protein. That is the most important macronutrient post-workout for you to take in, because that is exactly what you need to recover muscles, okay? To gain muscle, to recover from muscle damage, you need protein. Again, somewhere between 0.3 to 0.5 grams per kilo of body weight protein, if you're eating a dairy or meat source, is going to be enough for you to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, you're going to need to be more towards 0.5 to 0.6 just because of needing a combined protein source to reach the total amount of amino acids and the total amount of leucine that you need to stimulate optimal muscle protein synthesis. In terms of carbohydrates, you don't necessarily need these to recover, okay? And I know this might be different from what you've heard before, but it depends on when the next exercise session is, and if your exercise session even depleted all of your natural glycogen levels, which is your storage form of glucose, your storage form of carbohydrate in the muscle. A lot of CrossFit workouts, just doing a few sets of squats and then doing a short, high-intense workout, although it feels like a lot of effort, and it is, it's not exactly going to be completely glycogen depleting. Your body can store a lot of glycogen within the body, and so depending on when your next exercise session is, you might not need to have carbohydrates, or you might not need to have carbohydrates exactly in that post-workout meal, because you could have them in a later meal that could then be the pre-workout meal. So let's say you trained in the evening and then you went home and you did have carbohydrates, and then the next day you trained in the morning. That's great. Let's say you train in the morning and then you just have protein after your workout. You then have lunch and dinner before training in the morning again for you to have carbohydrates. If you're doing a double day and you train morning and evening, you have got 2 meals there in which to have carbohydrates, which are going to help you recover and fuel for your evening session. Dietary fat is another one that you don't really need to consider, because you can get it within each meal to fill your whole total fat quantity for the day. There is some really good research around improved muscle protein synthesis when people drank whole milk instead of skimmed milk, and when they ate whole eggs instead of egg whites, and that was because of the fat within those products increasing muscle protein synthesis. So in terms of getting fat post-workout, it could be a really great way to improve muscle recovery. So a simple post-workout meal could be to have some protein and some nuts, or to have a protein shake and some nuts blended together, a protein bar and some nut butter. You get the gist. Okay, so again, carbohydrates can be taken in post-workout if you really want them, but just know that they're not absolutely necessary for recovery, especially if you have other opportunities to get carbohydrate in before the next workout. So carbohydrates, in my opinion, are more important pre-workout than post-workout. Protein is necessary for both, and fats, you can have them then if you want, or you can have them in other meals of the day. It's completely up to your preference. Okay, so there are my thoughts on pre and post-workout nutrition for CrossFit. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to reach out to me and ask.